all that celebrations are magnificent, at the heart of the pageantry is a simple message: service.
Queen Camilla believed Sandringham represented something untouchable, a private royal sanctuary tied to her marriage, her position, and the future she expected beside King Charles. But inside a sealed legal briefing, Palace Solicitors confirmed a reality she had never prepared herself to face. Prince William would inherit the Sandringham Estate and the immense private fortune connected to it, leaving Camilla with no permanent claim over the property she had quietly begun treating as part of her own legacy. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla did not move. She read the decisive paragraph twice, tightened her grip on the paper, and asked whether William would control who could remain at Sandringham after the king was gone. The solicitor answered carefully. The Prince of Wales, Charles's direct heir, would receive complete private authority over the estate, its farms, residences, commercial income, collections, and the fortune attached to them. The answer cut deeper because Sandringham was not simply another palace maintained by the state. It was a private family estate, passed from sovereign to sovereign as personal property, not routine administration. It was a choice about blood, inheritance, and who would hold power when Charles could no longer protect her place. Camilla asked whether the settlement could still be changed. The solicitors exchanged one glance, and their silence became its own verdict. Charles faced the same papers in a separate room. He set down his pen, looked toward the closed door, and said nothing when an advisor asked whether the Queen had been prepared for the wording. His silence exposed the truth. The arrangement had not appeared by accident. The king knew the settlement prevented the estate from being divided, redirected, or placed under the control of a surviving spouse. Everything would pass intact to William. Camilla felt the meaning settle over her. She had imagined Sandringham as proof that her life beside the monarch had created something permanent. Now her future access could depend on a stepson whose trust she had never fully secured. She folded the briefing, placed it down, and demanded that every clause be explained again. Elsewhere, William received a summons for his confidential briefing. The future king did not know that Camilla had already seen the papers, that Charles had chosen silence, or that her private shock was steadily hardening into resolve. She no longer wanted reassurance. She wanted answers from both men. But before William could learn exactly what he had inherited, Camilla needed to understand whether she had lost only a fortune or the royal future she had spent years quietly building. The legal language appeared cold and simple, but the emotions behind it were anything but. To William, Sandringham carried memories of childhood Christmases, family grief, and the grandmother who taught him that royal inheritance was a duty rather than a reward. To Charles, it represented the burden of preserving what he had received. But to Camilla, the estate had become proof that she would never again be treated as temporary. And now that proof was slipping away. William entered the briefing without triumph. He remembered walking the Sandringham grounds beside Queen Elizabeth, hearing her warn that private royal estates survived only when each generation protected them from ambition, division, and personal demands. Sandringham was privately owned family property rather than a state-managed palace, meaning its land, income, and residences could give the future king enormous independence from public royal funding. That made the inheritance powerful, but it also made every decision surrounding it painfully personal. Camilla sat with a trusted aide and admitted what she had never said openly. She had not expected to replace William or break the direct line of inheritance. She had expected Charles to guarantee that she would never again live at another person's mercy. The Queen Consort had hosted lunches, shaped guest arrangements, approved household changes, and slowly imagined Sandringham as the center of her later life beside the monarch. Now she feared those years of investment had created influence without security. William listened as the solicitor detailed the fortune: tenant farms, valuable land, commercial leases, private residences, artwork, personal collections, and investment income would all pass with the estate. The prince did not smile. He asked whether his father had personally approved the terms and whether Camilla had already been told. His questions revealed unease, not celebration, because he understood that receiving Sandringham could strengthen his future reign, while devastating someone still living inside his father's present one. Charles felt the same conflict from the opposite side. The king knew preserving the estate for his son protected the direct succession, the line through which royal property and duty would eventually pass to George. Yet he also understood that the decision confirmed his wife's deepest fear. When bloodline and marriage collided, the monarchy would protect inheritance first. The next disclosure changed everything. Camilla had once requested that part of Sandringham be placed into a permanent trust, a legal arrangement protecting property for a specific person, that would give her lifetime authority over one residence and its surrounding land. The request had never entered the final papers. William closed the folder and asked to speak with Charles alone. At that same moment, Camilla instructed her aide to arrange an immediate meeting with the king. Neither knew the other was moving toward the same closed door. Yet the real cause of the crisis was buried deeper than the inheritance papers, inside one private Sandringham incident that Charles had never forgiven and Camilla had never imagined would return to destroy her plans. The battle over Sandringham did not begin in a solicitor's office. It began during a private Christmas gathering 18 months earlier, when a seemingly ordinary conversation about renovations became a direct challenge to the future king's authority. The exchange lasted less than 20 minutes, but those present would later remember it as the moment Charles stopped viewing Camilla's plans as harmless preparation and began treating them as a threat to the unity of his inheritance. Camilla had spent months suggesting changes to Sandringham's private rooms. She argued that the estate should reflect Charles's reign and give her a secure household during illness, transition, or widowhood. At first, William believed the proposals concerned furniture, staffing, and practical arrangements. His concern sharpened only when a documented legal memorandum showed that private advisors had examined a lifetime trust, a legal structure giving one person protected use or control of property for life, for part of the estate. Christmas Eve changed everything. Camilla placed a draft proposal before Charles in the library and told him the matter had to be settled before William inherited. She refused, she said, to spend her widowhood asking her stepson for permission to remain in a place she had helped maintain. The queen consort believed she was defending her dignity. The king heard something more dangerous, a request to separate part of Sandringham from the direct line. William entered after being summoned by his father and caught the final sentence. He stopped beside the table and asked whether decisions about his family inheritance were being negotiated without him. The prince had tolerated household changes, but ownership was different. Sandringham mattered because dividing its land or residences could weaken the estate financially and create competing claims for future generations. Camilla felt cornered. She insisted that she wanted security, not William's birthright. He replied that taking one protected section from the estate would still alter what had been preserved intact for decades. Charles watched the argument harden, then lifted the proposal, folded it once, and said no decision would be made that night. The silence after she left carried the real consequence. Charles instructed his private secretary, through a recorded office memorandum, to commission a full legal review of Sandringham's succession. He later ordered solicitors to strengthen the inheritance papers so no private agreement, remarriage provision, household arrangement, or future pressure could divide the estate before it passed to William. Camilla never learned that her own proposal caused those protections. She believed the king had postponed the discussion. In truth, he had quietly turned delay into permanent refusal. Now the past returned with brutal force. Camilla discovered through the present legal briefing that William knew about the Christmas proposal. She immediately concluded that he had shaped the final wording and decided she would confront him before Charles could soften the truth again. What had once been whispered across a Christmas table was now written into law, and when Camilla finally faced William, neither of them could pretend the conflict was only about property. Camilla did not wait for the palace to arrange a carefully managed conversation. She entered the private room where William was reviewing the solicitor's briefing, closed the door herself, and placed her copy of the inheritance papers directly in front of him. There were no cameras, no public smiles, and no aides to soften the exchange. Only a future king, his father's wife, and the estate that had turned years of buried resentment into an unavoidable confrontation. William rose, but Camilla refused the chair he offered. She asked whether he had encouraged Charles to block her from receiving any controlling interest in Sandringham. The prince answered with care. He had asked for the estate to remain intact, not for her to be humiliated. Preserving it, he said, was part of his duty to George and the generations who would one day inherit the same responsibility. Camilla's restraint broke. She said everyone spoke proudly about future generations, while expecting her to accept a future in which her home, staff, and daily security could be changed by William with a single signature. The Queen Consort understood that full discretion over private residences meant the owner could decide who stayed, who left, and under what conditions. That power mattered because once Charles was gone, she feared no title would protect her from becoming dependent on her stepson's goodwill. William felt the accusation land. He reminded her that the Christmas trust proposal had been discussed without his knowledge and that part of his inheritance had nearly been separated before he was even consulted. Camilla replied that desperation, not greed, had driven her. She had watched royal loyalty shift before, and she refused to pretend widowhood would leave her untouched by the same cold machinery. The paper trembled slightly as she pointed to the decisive clause. She asked him plainly whether he would remove her from Sandringham after Charles's death. William paused. The silence was brief, but to Camilla, it felt like an answer. William finally revealed, through a documented solicitor's draft already prepared for review, that he had requested a lifetime accommodation guarantee for her. It would secure a residence, household funding, and personal protection, but it would grant no ownership and no authority over the estate. Camilla heard only the insult beneath the offer. She accused him of reducing the Queen to a protected guest inside a world she had helped Charles maintain. William answered that no title could override the line of inheritance. The future king believed the boundary was necessary. She believed it exposed exactly how temporary her place had always been. Camilla set down the paper and stepped back. She told him his true view of her position was now unmistakable. Then she opened the door. Charles was standing outside. The king had heard enough to know that legal language could no longer contain the damage. The confrontation had exposed William's resolve, but the power to preserve or overturn the arrangement still rested with Charles, and his next decision would wound one of them beyond repair. For all Camilla's anger and William's determination, the decisive power had never belonged to either of them. The Sandringham inheritance remained Charles's private property to protect, divide, or redirect. One signature could preserve the estate for William. Another could create the lifetime control Camilla demanded. Alone with the final papers, the king faced a choice no constitutional rule could make for him: honor his wife's fear or protect his son's inheritance. Charles sat before two documents and understood that neither could save everyone. Sandringham was privately owned rather than held by the crown, meaning the estate belonged personally to the monarch instead of being managed as public royal property. While he lived, the king alone could decide how its homes, land, income, and collections would pass. Advisors had warned him that dividing those assets could create rival centers of control and drag future family disputes into courts, negotiations, and public scandal. The first paper named William as sole successor. The second guaranteed Camilla a residence, staff funding, personal income, and lifelong security without giving her ownership. Charles rested one hand beside the pen as the door opened. Camilla entered quietly and placed her hand on the chair opposite him. She did not accuse him. She asked whether he had ever intended Sandringham to become part of their shared life, or whether he had simply allowed her to believe it would. Charles felt the question strike deeper than anger. He admitted that he had encouraged her sense of belonging, but had never promised control. The monarch told her he should have made that difference clear before she built her future around the estate. His regret was real, but regret could not undo the papers waiting between them. The truth came next. Charles explained through the documented legal instructions he had given after Christmas Eve that William had not ordered the protective clauses. The prince had requested continuity, but the king himself had directed solicitors to block any spousal control, private division, or future transfer before Sandringham passed to his son. Camilla stared at him. She had blamed William for a decision her husband had made in silence. The queen consort asked why Charles had allowed that misunderstanding to survive until the solicitors exposed it. He answered that he had hoped the legal settlement would protect the family without forcing the emotional confrontation now unfolding. Charles signed the inheritance agreement. Sandringham and its fortune would pass intact to William. Then he signed Camilla's security guarantee, giving her comfort but no authority over the estate. Camilla watched him set the pen down. She did not argue. She simply stepped away from the chair, and her silence told Charles that he had protected the inheritance while placing something far more fragile at risk. Charles's signature settled the legal question, but inside the royal household, the consequences arrived immediately, and Camilla's first response showed that she would not continue as though nothing had changed. The morning after Charles signed the papers, Sandringham looked unchanged. The staff followed their schedules, the gates opened as usual, and breakfast was served at the expected hour. Yet inside Camilla's rooms, drawers were being closed, personal files were disappearing into cases, and invitations were being cancelled. She had not lost the estate that morning. Legally, it had never been hers, but emotionally, she began leaving before anyone had asked her to go. Camilla instructed her private secretary to remove correspondence boxes, family possessions, and personal archives from the estate. She cancelled a gathering she had planned to host, and told staff that every future event should pass through Charles's office instead of hers. The queen consort had spent years acting as Sandringham's hostess, shaping guest lists and household routines, so her withdrawal immediately unsettled courtiers who had treated her authority as permanent. Charles entered her room and noticed the empty spaces first. Framed photographs had disappeared from one cabinet, while personal books had been lifted from another. The king asked whether she intended to leave at once. Camilla did not look at him when she answered. She was only taking what belonged to her. The words carried more than sadness. Camilla refused to sign the lifetime residence guarantee until her own solicitors reviewed every condition. That guarantee was a legal promise protecting her home, staff, and income for life, but she feared it would make her appear dependent upon William's generosity rather than secure through her husband's decision. Her dignity had become the one possession she could still control. William learned of the removals through a confidential household note and felt an unexpected weight of guilt. The prince still believed Sandringham had to remain intact, yet he understood what her actions meant. Camilla was not responding like someone who had lost a legal argument. She was responding like a woman who believed her place in the family would end the moment Charles's life did. The household began dividing quietly. Staff questioned who would approve future renovations, charitable events, private dinners, and guest arrangements once William inherited. Some remained loyal to the current queen. Others began preparing for the next reign. Every practical question carried an emotional warning. Power was already shifting before anyone was ready to admit it. Camilla's concern deepened when a confidential schedule revealed William's planned estate review covering finances, land management, residences, and private collections. She saw dismantling where he saw preparation. Yet the future king also ordered that none of her rooms be altered or reassigned. He wanted continuity, not erasure, but protection without trust still felt temporary. Camilla returned the unsigned guarantee to Charles with 6 handwritten words. Security is not the same as belonging. Those 6 words forced William to confront the human cost of his inheritance, and they led him toward a private meeting that would change the emotional meaning of Sandringham forever. William could have allowed the solicitors to complete the process and left Camilla's future to carefully written guarantees. Instead, he asked to meet her alone, in the small room overlooking the Sandringham grounds, where Queen Elizabeth once held private family conversations. There would be no Charles, no lawyers, and no palace officials between them. For the first time, inheritance was removed from the language of power and placed inside a conversation about fear. Camilla arrived expecting another negotiation, But William had brought no folder, legal advisor, or prepared statement. He asked her to sit, and promised that nothing said between them would be carried through palace officials. The prince understood that advisors could explain ownership, but they could not repair the damage caused by silence. William admitted that his hesitation during their confrontation had hurt her. When she asked whether he would remove her after Charles's death, he had feared making a promise that future legal or financial circumstances might complicate. Camilla had heard uncertainty as rejection. He now understood why. Camilla answered with painful honesty. The fortune itself was not what had devastated her most. She feared losing Charles, and then immediately becoming powerless, with every room, employee, and familiar routine controlled by people who might see the queen consort as part of a finished reign. Her concern mattered because Sandringham had become more than a residence. It represented stability after years spent fighting for acceptance. William told her he had no intention of forcing her out, reducing her staff without cause, or erasing her place at the estate. The future king promised that Sandringham would remain available to her for life through protected arrangements. Yet he also drew the boundary clearly. Camilla would not own, divide, transfer, or control the inheritance. The estate had to pass intact to him, and eventually to George, preserving the direct family line Charles had chosen. The promise did not give Camilla everything she wanted, but it gave her what the legal document had failed to offer: a personal assurance that she would not be treated as an inconvenience once the king was gone. William reached for the unsigned accommodation guarantee, then slid it away. An accommodation guarantee was a binding agreement securing someone's right to live in a residence under stated conditions. He said they should rewrite it together so it reflected dignity rather than dependency. Camilla agreed on one condition. The document must say her residence came through Charles's settlement, not through a favor William could later withdraw. The prince accepted immediately. They left without affection, and without pretending every wound had healed. But the battle had changed. Sandringham was no longer a prize one of them had to win. It had become proof that succession and compassion could exist together. Their private agreement eased the family crisis, but once the solicitor's confirmation reached the outside world, Sandringham became the center of a national argument about inheritance, loyalty, and Camilla's true place in royal history. By sunrise, the Sandringham decision was no longer contained inside royal folders and private rooms. Newsrooms cleared their front pages, broadcasters interrupted scheduled programs, and crowds gathered outside palace gates, carrying opinions sharpened by decades of royal memory. The legal confirmation that William would inherit the estate fortune became more than a property story. It was interpreted as a national verdict on bloodline, marriage, duty, and whether Camilla had ever truly secured a permanent place inside the monarchy. Britain divided almost instantly. Commentators argued that William's inheritance protected the traditional passage of private royal wealth through the direct line. That principle meant family-owned estates moved from the sovereign to the next heir rather than being distributed like ordinary marital property. Camilla's supporters answered that years of public duty beside Charles should have earned the Queen stronger protection, not merely permission to remain in a home she had helped shape. Palace officials released a tightly controlled statement confirming that Sandringham's succession had been settled alongside appropriate lifetime provisions for Camilla. The wording emphasized continuity and dignity, but the attempt at balance could not stop the headlines. One front page captured the shock completely. Beneath a photograph of Sandringham, the words, "William's estate, Camilla's heartbreak," filled the page, while a smaller caption declared that she would keep a home, but not the fortune. Outside the estate gates, a crowd gathered beneath umbrellas. One woman raised a handwritten sign reading, "Protect the estate, respect the Queen," turning the national argument into 6 simple words. A television broadcaster intensified the debate by calling the inheritance the moment the future reign became financially independent. The phrase mattered because Sandringham's income, land, and private assets could strengthen William's authority before he ever became king. What looked like inheritance suddenly sounded like the beginning of a transfer of power. Camilla watched part of the coverage in silence. When a commentator described her as excluded, she switched off the television and told her aide that the public would never understand the difference between losing ownership and losing dignity. The Queen Consort could accept that Sandringham belonged to the direct line. She could not accept being portrayed as a defeated outsider. William felt no victory. The prince instructed his office not to celebrate the fortune, and rejected proposals for a triumphant appearance at the estate. He knew every headline praising him risked deepening Camilla's humiliation. Charles responded by authorizing further details about her lifetime residential rights. The king wanted the public to know that she would not be displaced, and that the family had reached a binding settlement. The final shift came when William and Camilla appeared together at a scheduled engagement. Their greeting was restrained but respectful. No affection was performed, yet neither looked defeated. The world had chosen its headlines, the lawyers had completed their work, and the family had survived the confrontation, leaving only one question to answer. What had Sandringham truly revealed about Camilla, William, and the monarchy they would leave behind? In the end, there was no last-minute reversal, no hidden amendment, and no royal intervention capable of changing the line of inheritance. William would receive Sandringham, its land, its private wealth, and the responsibility of preserving it for the next generation. Camilla would not become its owner. Yet the final settlement proved that losing control did not require losing dignity, and that royal succession could protect tradition without abandoning the people left behind by it. William's inheritance remained unchanged. Upon Charles's death, Sandringham would pass to the prince intact, including its private residences, farmland, valuable collections, commercial income, and wider fortune. The strengthened inheritance settlement, a binding legal arrangement deciding how private property would pass, ensured that no later pressure or family dispute could divide the estate. Camilla signed the revised lifetime agreement after her private conversation with William. It guaranteed her residence, household support, personal security, and continued access to designated parts of Sandringham, but gave her no ownership or authority to transfer its assets. The Queen Consort had not won control. She had secured something more personal, the certainty that she would not be pushed aside when her husband was gone. Charles met her after the signing and admitted that his secrecy had caused much of the pain. The king apologized for allowing legal protection to replace honest conversation. Camilla accepted his words, but she did not pretend the wound had disappeared. She understood why he had protected the estate. He finally understood why silence had made that protection feel like betrayal. William then assured his father that Camilla's rights would be honored as part of the monarch's final family settlement, not as an unwanted obligation. The future king's promise brought visible relief to Charles because the conflict threatening his household had finally been contained. Camilla returned several personal possessions to her rooms at Sandringham. She placed one framed photograph back on the cabinet she had emptied. The gesture carried a quiet verdict. She no longer imagined herself as the estate's future owner, but neither did she feel like a temporary guest waiting to be removed. William prepared for stewardship instead of celebration. He ordered the estate review to protect tenants, preserve the land, strengthen sustainable agriculture, and defend the traditions Charles and Queen Elizabeth had entrusted to him. His fortune had grown, but so had the weight of his duty. The truth was now complete. Camilla's devastation came from learning that marriage could not change hereditary succession. Her recovery came from forcing the family to admit that legal certainty without emotional reassurance could become cruelty. Charles preserved Sandringham, William inherited responsibility rather than victory, and she secured respect without taking what belonged to the direct line. And with the final signatures secured, Sandringham ceased to represent a royal family divided by inheritance. It became the place where William accepted his duty, Charles faced the cost of silence, and Camilla discovered that belonging could survive even when ownership did not. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.